こんばんは。Forex TV ニューヨークのレミです。1月29日火曜日の為替レポート、ニューヨークレビューをお伝えします。29日のアメリカ株式市場は続伸しました。ダウ平均は前日比96ドル41セント高の 12,480 ドル30セントで終えた。ナスダック総合株価指数は 8.15 ポイント高の 2358.06 で終えた。今朝発表された2007年12月の耐久財受注が前月比 5.2% 増と市場予想を上回りました。30日まで2日間の日程で始まった米連邦公開市場委員会 FOMC では FRB が 0.5% の利下げを決めるとの見方が多いようです。明日の FOMC の結果発表を前に円には売りが出にくく107円台近辺で揉み合う場面がありました。ニューヨーク外国為替市場で円相場は小幅に続落しました。ドル円は前日比20銭円安ドル高の1ドル107円5銭から15銭で取引を終えた。またユーロ円は前日比20銭円安ユーロ高の158円20銭から30銭で取引を終えた。それでは CFR のブラッド・セッツァーさんとのインタビューをご覧ください。
Well, first of all, I'd like to start out with a broad outlook for the U.S. dollar. The market is awaiting the Federal interest rate announcement tomorrow afternoon at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, last week we got the surprise rate cut of 75 basis points for both the Fed funds as well as the discount rate. So right now there's a division over whether we'll get a no interest rate cut, 25 or 50 basis points. So if you could explain what factors we need to keep our eyes on in the short term.
I mean, I think the obvious short-term factor is the one you mentioned, is the Fed's rate decision. I think the market has now puts a higher probability on a 50 basis point cut than on any other outcome. And I would assume that that's not fully yet priced into the dollar, so that would at least directionally be dollar negative. And so I think in the near term, that is the obvious risk. Looking out just a little bit further, I think it's the main question is whether Europe and the U.S. will continue to be at different points in their economic cycle, whether the Fed will be continuing with further rate cuts, and whether at some point economic weakness will spread to Europe and prompt the ECB to also join in a rate-cutting cycle. But so long as the Fed is cutting and the ECB is on hold, directionally at least, that's dollar negative, although at some point the euro's strength will start to contribute to the weakness in economic activity in the Euroland, which will sort of introduce some limits on that cycle. But I'm not sure we're quite there yet.
Okay, while we're still on the topic of central banks, the market has been focusing on the ECB as well as BOE and whether we were getting dovish or hawkish comments out of those central banks. But while we're discussing monetary policy and we're focusing on comments from the central banks, in the short term, interest rate cuts are expected to hurt the U.S. currency. But tell me, how does a weaker dollar affect conditions domestically here in the U.S. economy?
Well, I think the weaker dollar right now is a reflection of broader economic weakness in the United States. And when domestic demand isn't firing on all cylinders, it's helpful if net exports can pick up the slack. So the dollar's weakness has contributed to the improvement in the non-oil trade balance, particularly an improvement relative to, say, Europe and relative to Canada, those portions of the world which have seen their currencies appreciate against the dollar. The improvement vis-a-vis Asia has been much more modest. And so I think at this point in the economic cycle, given concerns about domestic demand and about the strength of U.S. economic activity, the additional support provided by net exports is a positive.
Okay, while we're talking about other economies in relation to the U.S., let's address China. I know that you focused about this in your writings, but we've seen a record rise in China's foreign assets. And so if you could tell us about the appreciation of the Chinese currency, the renminbi, against the U.S. dollar, and how this affects China's exports.
Sure. I mean, China has allowed the renminbi to appreciate at a faster pace against the dollar, a significantly faster pace than was the case in either 2005 or 2006. At the same time, I think it's vital to recognize that China's appreciation against the dollar hasn't really translated into a broad appreciation of the Chinese currency against other important trading partners of China. The renminbi has continued to depreciate against the euro, and it's actually depreciated against currencies like the Indian rupee and the Thai baht. So I think on a broad trade-weighted basis, the renminbi hasn't significantly appreciated. Now, looking forward, if the dollar stabilizes and if China continues to allow its currency to appreciate against the dollar, hopefully at some point in time that will translate into a broader appreciation against China, against some of its other important trading partners. Remember, China now trades more with Europe than with the United States, so focusing exclusively on the renminbi dollar as opposed to the renminbi euro is, in my judgment, a mistake. So far, the appreciation of the renminbi against the dollar has not had a significant impact on China's broader export growth, largely because of very strong growth in China's exports to the commodity exporting parts of the world and very strong growth to Europe. Looking forward, though, I don't think that it is realistic for China to be able to completely offset the impact of a slowing U.S. and the corresponding fall in U.S. demand for Chinese products and the ongoing renminbi appreciation against the dollar by increasing its exports to the rest of the world. So I think at some point, net exports will start to contribute less to China's growth. But given that China's economy has been growing so strongly, and given China's capacity to take steps to support its own domestic demand, I actually think that's a positive. I think directionally, that's what China needs. Moreover, I think Chinese policymakers are increasingly focused on the risk associated with domestic inflation, and a stronger currency would help there.
以上 CFR のブラッド・セッツァーさんとのインタビューでした。 ForexTV ニューヨークのレミがお伝えしました。最新の為替情報については ForexTV ジャパンをご覧ください。